Hi, I'm Venna. The day my grandfather disappeared, my father stood in front of me, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You're nothing but a leech living off a dead man's name." Then he threw me out. Just like that. No warning, no mercy. For 5 years, I believed he was right. But tonight, at the family reunion he didn't want me at, the man he swore was dead walked through the doors, my grandfather. And in that moment, my father's empire began to fall. What would you have done if your own family erased you and then watched you survive? Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this and where from? Drop a comment below. I read every one. I woke up that morning before sunrise, the house heavy with silence. Strange, considering how early Grandpa Arthur usually stirred. I could always count on the smell of his coffee drifting through the halls, a quiet comfort I'd taken for granted all my life. But that morning, nothing. I paced the kitchen, checking my phone for missed calls, texts, anything. Garrett brushed past me without a word, coffee in hand, his, not Grandpa's. No one seemed concerned except me. Even when I asked directly, Garrett just shrugged. He's old, Venna. Probably forgot where he parked himself. By mid-morning, Marcus called for a family meeting. His voice on the intercom was clipped, impersonal. Something about the way he said the word family sent a chill through me. Still, I followed Garrett down to the conference room. Whitmore Dynamics wasn't just a company, it was Arthur's life's work. Our family legacy, at least it had been. The room wasn't meant for me. That was clear the moment I stepped in. Marcus sat at the head of the long mahogany table, Garrett grinning at his right. The seats were full, with lawyers, board members, and senior staff. I stood by the door, no chair offered. Marcus didn't waste time. "Effective immediately, I'll be assuming control of Whitmore Dynamics," he announced, calm as if he were reading the weather report. "Given my father's unfortunate absence, it's time we modernize." He turned to the wall where our grandfather's portrait had hung for decades. Now it was bare. "I'm rebranding. We'll operate as Marlowe Global starting today." A ripple of polite claps, a few exchanged glances. Garrett's smile widened. I swallowed hard. What about Grandpa's shares? His wishes? His legacy? Marcus's eyes met mine, ice cold. And in front of the entire room, he said it. "You've lived long enough as a leech off a dead man's name, Venna." The room went still. For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard right. My throat tightened. Breath caught somewhere painful. Marcus didn't blink. He just turned back to his papers like I didn't exist. I felt everyone's eyes on me, not out of sympathy, but curiosity, watching me crumble like I was part of the entertainment. I should have spoken up. I should have demanded answers. But my body didn't move. I just stood there, the shame clinging to me like smoke. "Security," Marcus said, still not looking my way. The guards arrived silently. Garrett leaned back in his chair, legs crossed, enjoying the show. One of the guards, a man who'd known me since I was a teenager, avoided my eyes as he motioned me toward the door. I didn't fight. What would have been the point? I walked out, past familiar faces pretending not to know me, past walls where Arthur's photographs once hung, already taken down. By noon, I wasn't just disowned. I was erased. I spent the rest of the day in a fog. I don't remember how I got back to my apartment. Maybe I drove. Maybe I walked. My keys were still in my hand when I sat down on the fraying couch. Hours passed. Night crept in. I sat there, replaying Marcus's words until they weren't words anymore, just noise that echoed in my skull. A leech off a dead man's name. Like Arthur meant nothing, like I was nothing. At some point, I found myself holding it. The old embroidered handkerchief Grandpa had given me years ago. It still smelled faintly of his aftershave. He'd carried it every day. He never would have called me that. I closed my eyes, clutching the fabric like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. Marcus thought this was over. I wasn't ready to lose him. Not yet. But time doesn't wait for what we're ready for. 5 years slipped past like sand through my fingers. Autumn had returned to Austin again, painting the streets in amber and rust, yet I felt stuck in that morning when everything changed. My apartment stayed the same too, small, cramped, smelling faintly of old coffee and unopened windows. I'd tell you I rebuilt my life. I didn't, not in any way that mattered. I took jobs that paid just enough to keep the lights on. Retail, temp work, bartending during weekends when the tips were worth more than the hours. Anything that kept me moving, anything that kept me from sitting too long with Marcus's words gnawing at me. A leech living off a dead man's name. Funny how one sentence can stain 5 years of your life. On good days, I convinced myself I was surviving. On bad days, it felt more like disappearing. Mom tried to soften the fall. Quietly, of course. Clara never spoke Marcus's name when she visited, which wasn't often. She'd come by after work, still in her scrubs from the clinic, bringing whatever she could, groceries, leftovers. Once, a faded photo album that she left sitting on my coffee table without a word. Neither of us opened it. She never mentioned Garrett or Arthur. We both knew why. Garrett and Marcus had become household names in Texas by then. Their faces smiled back from billboards, their company's rebrand a textbook case of modernizing a legacy. Marlowe Global, sleek, ruthless, everywhere. And with every ribbon-cutting ceremony and headline, my grandfather's name was buried deeper. I followed it all, of course. Couldn't help myself. Every news report, every article, every corporate scandal whispered between lines. At first, it was just habit. Then it became obsession, because behind the polished ads, there were cracks. Oil pipelines approved in protected areas, forests cleared overnight in Costa Rica, fishing communities displaced without warning. I read about it at midnight, sitting in the dark, scrolling until my eyes burned. Marlowe Global wasn't building an empire. They were devouring whatever stood in their way. And the man who called me a leech, he was the one profiting from it. Sometimes I thought about writing to a journalist, sending everything I'd gathered. But who would listen to someone like me? The forgotten daughter, the disinherited. It would sound like bitterness. Maybe it was. I remember last Thanksgiving like it was yesterday. The first cold front of the year had settled in, wind rattling the windows. I didn't plan to see anyone. Then, just past sunset, there was a knock. It was Mom, standing there, holding a foil-covered tray, cheeks pink from the wind. I couldn't sit there, not after what they said about you today, she murmured, stepping inside. We didn't talk much. She set the tray down, stuffing, mashed potatoes, a single slice of pumpkin pie. The silence between us filled every corner of the apartment. Later, as she pulled her jacket back on, she looked at me for the first time that night. He used to call you his shadow, you know, because you were always following him around. I didn't answer. She left without waiting for one. I sat at the table after she was gone, staring at the untouched pie. Marcus's voice echoed in my head again, as it always did. Leech. I scraped the whole plate into the trash. Weeks passed, then months, until one evening, when the mail slot clicked. I didn't expect anything. Bills, maybe? A reminder from the leasing office. But when I bent down, I found a single cream-colored envelope on the floor. My name printed on the front. Wrong. Vina. Not even spelled right. Inside was an invitation, formal, cold, from Marlowe Global, to me, a family reunion, to celebrate 5 years of success. Success built on Arthur's grave. I sat down on the floor, envelope in one hand, invitation in the other, reading and rereading, as if the words might change. Celebrate. 5 years of silence, and now they wanted to celebrate. My stomach turned. My fingers trembled, not from anger, but something deeper, something hollow. Later that night, Mom called. "I got mine too," she said quietly. I think I should go." I didn't answer. My throat was tight. "You don't have to," she added quickly. "I just thought you should know." After she hung up, I sat alone for hours. The invitation lay on the coffee table, next to Grandpa's handkerchief. I didn't remember grabbing it, but there it was, soft and worn in my palm. I closed my fingers around it, like it could anchor me to something real. If Grandpa were alive, he'd never let this happen. But he wasn't, and all I had left were ghosts. At first, I thought the knocking was in my head, a side effect of too many sleepless nights, too many hours spent staring at the invitation still sitting on my coffee table. But then it came again, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I sat up, heart racing. It was nearly midnight. Nobody came to my door this late. I wrapped the old blanket tighter around my shoulders and stood, every muscle in my body stiff with dread. From the peephole, I saw nothing but the shadow of a man. I should have called someone. The police, maybe. But my body moved before my mind caught up. My hand twisted the lock, and I cracked the door just enough to see his face. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. "Venna," he said softly, his voice more gravel than I remembered. "Let me in. We don't have much time." I opened the door wider, but my mind refused to catch up with what I was seeing. My grandfather stood there, gaunt, older than 5 years should have made him, eyes sunken, skin weathered like he'd spent every day since his disappearance under a sun that didn't care whether he lived or died. "Grandpa?" It came out as a whisper. My voice cracked. I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, leaning heavier on his cane than he ever had when I was a child. His coat smelled like smoke and earth. I locked the door behind us, still half believing this was a dream. "I must be losing it," I said, my voice shaking as I turned toward him. "You're dead. You can't be here." He sat down heavily at the small table where I drank coffee every morning, looked up at me with eyes that were tired but clear. I should be. That broke me. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the tears burn down my cheeks. I crossed the room in 2 steps and dropped to my knees beside him, gripping his hand like it was the only solid thing left in the world. His skin was rougher now, but familiar. "You're real," I whispered. "You're really here." He placed a shaking hand over mine. "For now." I pulled myself together enough to fetch him tea. My hands trembled so much the cup rattled against the saucer. I sat across from him, watching him sip slowly, as if it was the first warmth he'd felt in years. Then, in the quiet, he spoke. Marcus and Garrett tried to kill me. I blinked. It took a few seconds for the words to register. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a robbery. That hunting trip, they planned it. They planned all of it. My stomach churned. He spoke slowly, voice flat, like someone recounting something too rehearsed to still hurt. But I saw it in his eyes. He'd never stopped hurting. They waited until we were deep in the hills. Marcus pretended his boot was stuck. Garrett hung back. I should have known. He paused, rubbed his face with shaking fingers. They pushed me, right over the ridge. The breath left my lungs. I hit rocks on the way down. Thought I was done. Should have been. But a local found me at sunrise, carried me to a small cabin, saved my life. I clung to his every word, too stunned to interrupt. I stayed hidden, at first, to heal. Then, I realized they'd told everyone I vanished, that they'd built their empire over my grave. I thought of Marlowe Global, of the ads, the headlines, of Marcus's smug smile. Why didn't you come back? My voice cracked. Why now? He set the cup down, looked me dead in the eyes, because I didn't know who I could trust. I felt like the floor beneath me shifted. But me? You were always the quiet one, Venna. You watched. You listened. You didn't ask for attention. That's why they dismissed you. But that's why you're the only person left who might help me stop them. I stared at him, shaking my head slowly. I'm nobody. You know what they did to me, what they called me. He nodded, his jaw tight. I know. And that's exactly why they'll never see you coming. Silence filled the apartment, heavier than the air itself. Then he leaned forward, his voice lower. Tomorrow's reunion. It's not a celebration. It's a legal maneuver. Marcus plans to finalize everything. I've watched him build this for years. He's going to use the gathering to sign over full control, lock me out permanently. I tried to process it, but my mind circled back to one thought. I don't know what you want me to do. Gather information. Listen. Watch. Just like you always did. But this time, do it for both of us. He pulled something from his coat pocket, a small, worn piece of cloth. My breath caught. The handkerchief. The one I'd embroidered for him when I was a kid. The stitches clumsy, the colors faded, but still intact. I kept this, he said softly. It reminded me someone was waiting for me. My vision blurred again. I reached out, fingers grazing the fabric. He looked up. His eyes burned now, not with fear, but something else. We don't have time, Venna. Tomorrow, at that reunion, everything changes. I could barely sleep. Tomorrow wasn't just a reunion anymore. It was a battlefield. Morning came, but it didn't feel like morning. I'd barely closed my eyes. The first pale light creeping through my apartment window felt more like an interrogation lamp than the sun. I sat at the small table where Arthur had sat hours before, staring at nothing, feeling everything. My hands shook as I poured coffee, but the cup stayed untouched. Every word Arthur had said replayed in my head on a loop. Marcus, Garrett, their plan. My family wasn't broken by accident. They'd shattered it on purpose. I remembered the last words Marcus said to me before he threw me out of my grandfather's company. A leech living off a dead man's name. Used to wonder why he said that. What made him hate me enough to say it out loud in front of everyone? Now I knew. He wasn't afraid of me taking something from him. He was afraid of me remembering who it belonged to in the first place. Arthur stepped out from the bedroom, moving slow, cautious, as if the years' hiding still clung to him. His face was unreadable, but his hands shook as he carried a small, battered flash drive. He placed it on the table, sliding it toward me. "I need you to listen, Venna," he said, sitting down across from me. I hesitated, then reached for the flash drive with fingers that didn't feel like mine. Arthur connected it to my old laptop. The files opened, emails, contracts, scanned documents, but what stopped me cold was the folder labeled Recordings. Arthur clicked play. It was Marcus's voice first. Calm, cold, almost bored. "We push him. It's simple. If you hesitate, Garrett, I'll finish the job myself." Then Garrett's voice, laughing, soft, agreeing. I couldn't breathe. The coffee in my stomach threatened to come back up as I listened to my father and my brother, my own blood, plan to murder the man who raised me. Not even with rage, just business. The recordings blurred, their words turning into white noise as my head spun. Arthur spoke quietly, as if from far away. "They left me there, Venna, but that wasn't enough. Marcus needed me declared dead, so he forged documents, claimed control of Whitmore Dynamics. He renamed it Marlowe Global, after himself." I felt the shift then. Something inside me cracked, not like glass breaking, but steel twisting. Arthur placed a shaking hand over mine. "I'm sorry." For what? I didn't know. He turned back to the screen. His voice steadied. "Today, Marcus will announce the IPO. He's turning Whitmore Dynamics public. It'll be too big to stop after that." I looked up sharply. "You mean this reunion?" Arthur nodded. "It's a show. For investors. For the media. For control. He needed you and your mother in the photos. Make it look like family unity. Make it all legal." "And Mom?" "She thinks it's a celebration." I stood so fast my chair scraped the floor. Pacing the apartment, I felt anger push against the fear in my chest. "What do you expect me to do? Walk in there and... what? Stop him? He called me a leech, Grandpa. I'm nothing to them." Arthur's next words changed everything. "You're the only one I trust." I stopped. He reached into his coat again and placed a manila envelope next to the flash drive. His hands shook harder now. "I rewrote my will. You're the sole heir." My knees buckled. I sat back down, hard. No, I can't." "You can." His voice was firmer now. "Because you're the only one who never asked for anything." Silence fell between us like a verdict. I stared at the envelope, like it might burn me if I touched it. "I didn't want this. I know. I don't know how to be whatever this makes me." "You'll learn." His voice softened. "Venna, you've always watched from the edges. You've seen more than they know. That's your strength. And now, you're their last threat." I felt like I was drowning. Then Arthur did something that undid me more than all the documents and recordings combined. He reached into his coat once more, pulling out the old handkerchief, the one I'd embroidered for him as a child. He laid it beside the files like it belonged there. The stitches were frayed now. The thread colors faded, but it was still whole. I remembered the night I gave it to him, his birthday. I was 7. He smiled and told me I was his legacy. I looked at the handkerchief, then at the envelope, then at him, and I broke. No tears, just silence. The kind of silence that chokes you from the inside. Arthur didn't say a word. He just waited. When I finally stood, my legs felt unsteady. I moved to the bathroom, flicked on the harsh light, and stared at my reflection. For years, I'd avoided mirrors. Now I had no choice. I saw someone small, someone tired, someone afraid. But not today. I clenched the sink until my knuckles went white. I'm walking into that building today. Not for him, not for Garrett, for Grandpa, for Mom, for me. The words came out raw but steady. I stepped back into the living room. Arthur watched me without speaking. I picked up the flash drive, slipped it into my pocket. I'll go. Arthur nodded once. Nothing else needed to be said. I left the apartment that morning with my grandfather's drive burning against my hip like a brand. Today, I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I kept walking. Past the cracked sidewalks, past the bus stops, past the parts of Austin I used to know before my world collapsed. The flash drive in my pocket felt heavier than it should have. But that wasn't what weighed me down. I didn't even remember how I got to Marlowe Global's headquarters. 1 minute, I was staring at my apartment door. The next, I stood across the street from that cold tower of glass and steel, watching people in suits glide through the front doors like it was just another day. It wasn't. I hesitated, just for a second, then crossed the street. The staff at the door barely looked at me. Not even when I showed the invitation. The receptionist's glance was quick, dismissive, like she was scanning a name she'd been told didn't matter. "This way," she said flatly, guiding me past polished stone walls and silent security guards. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the chrome elevators as they opened. My own face startled me. Tired, tight, older than 5 years should have made me. When the doors opened again, Garrett was the first thing I saw. He was leaning against a marble column, whispering to one of the event staff. His eyes caught mine. And in that moment, the same smirk I'd seen in childhood flickered across his face. Not surprise, not regret, recognition, then dismissal. He said something quietly, and suddenly I was no longer invisible. The staff guided me, not to the center, not to the long, polished table near the stage, but to a small, isolated table near the far wall, the kind of table used when someone shows up uninvited, but you can't throw them out without making a scene. I sat down without speaking. From where I sat, I could see everything. The rows of executives, the investors, murmuring softly, the media personnel with their cameras at the ready. At the front, the stage gleamed like a throne room, and standing at its center was Marcus. He looked thinner than I remembered, or maybe just older, but his voice was the same. Today, we celebrate the future of Marlowe Global, a legacy built on vision, innovation, and family. I watched as Garrett stepped up beside him, perfectly timed, perfectly composed. Beside him, Marcus continued, never once glancing in my direction. We move forward, not from the past, but toward the future. No mention of Arthur, not even a token nod. I looked down at the tablecloth, breathing carefully, forcing my hands to stay still. A few minutes later, they seated my mother beside me. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her expression was empty, distant, as if sitting here was something happening to her, not something she chose. Neither of us spoke. On the stage, Garrett took the microphone. Marlowe Global stands on the strength of its leadership, of its future. He paused, letting the cameras settle. And today, I'm proud to announce, after the IPO, I'll be stepping forward as Marlowe Global's next CEO. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. I heard my mother inhale sharply beside me. And Garrett. He looked straight at me as the applause rose, holding my gaze as he smiled. I looked down. I couldn't bear it. My hand slipped under the tablecloth, gripping something small and soft. The handkerchief. The stitches were rough, faded now, but I felt them. I remembered 7-year-old me, sitting beside Arthur, sewing clumsy letters for his birthday. His voice came back to me then. "You're my legacy, Venna." I held that memory like a shield as Marcus lifted his champagne glass to toast Garrett's future. In that moment, something inside me changed. I knew. I wasn't leaving this room quietly. Marcus lifted his champagne, his voice clear, polished, and proud. "To Garrett Marlowe, the future CEO of Marlowe Global." The applause swelled like a wave breaking against glass walls. Cameras clicked, glasses lifted. From my table at the far edge of the room, I watched everyone rise to toast a future I wasn't meant to be part of. Garrett stood tall beside Marcus, smug and certain, soaking in every flash, every cheer. And I stood up. I didn't slam my chair back. I didn't shout. I simply rose from the shadow of that far table, the forgotten corner where they thought I'd sit quietly. The applause faltered. A few guests glanced in my direction, confused. Whispers flickered like sparks across the room. Marcus froze, his glass still raised. I heard my voice before I realized I was speaking. "Before we toast to the future, shouldn't someone acknowledge the past?" It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The silence that followed was louder than any words. Marcus slowly lowered his glass. His face was unreadable, but I saw it. The flicker of uncertainty. Garrett's jaw tightened. His hand dropped from Marcus's shoulder. I kept standing. "This company," I said quietly, my eyes locked on Marcus, "was built on a foundation most of you don't even remember." My voice stayed calm. Flat. It had to. "Maybe someone should ask whose name that foundation carried." Marcus cleared his throat. Once. His silence told me everything. The investors shifted in their seats. Staff glanced at each other, unsure whether they should intervene. Even the media hesitated, sensing something they didn't understand yet. Garrett recovered first. His voice broke through, smooth and practiced, dripping concern. "Venna, don't do this," he smiled, eyes glinting. "I know it's been hard for you. Family business isn't easy. It's personal, emotional, and frankly, not everyone handles being left behind." Laughter. Soft, uncomfortable, but real. My stomach twisted. Garrett took a step forward, eyes sweeping the room, gathering them. "She's not herself," he said gently. "She's been struggling for years. After Mom, well, we've all been helping her, of course, quietly, financially. Sometimes people lash out when they're hurting. A beat. She's not the enemy. She's just lost." He didn't even look at me as he said it. A few heads nodded. A few didn't meet my eyes. I felt the humiliation burn through my skin. My throat tightened, but I swallowed it, and then I met Garrett's gaze. He expected tears, collapse, maybe anger. I gave him none of it. Instead, I tilted my head slightly and studied him, as if I were looking at something fragile, or something I didn't fear anymore. "You're loud tonight, Garrett," I said softly. He blinked. You wouldn't speak this loudly if you weren't afraid. His face hardened. Marcus broke in. Enough. His voice was sharp, brittle. This is not the time or place. I want her escorted out. Staff hesitated. Now. I stepped forward. I wasn't shaking anymore. No need. I looked past Marcus, past Garrett, past every face turned toward me. This company wasn't built by the Marlows. Silence. And soon, the truth will stand taller than your glass towers. No one moved. I let the words settle. Then I turned. I didn't wait to be dragged out. I walked out myself. Every step I took echoed against the marble floor, sharper than applause, louder than any toast. The moment the door closed behind me, the night felt colder. And there, waiting at the edge of the parking lot, under the streetlights, was my grandfather. He looked at me and nodded. The moment the doors of that grand building closed behind me, the night swallowed me whole. I didn't look back, not once. My feet felt numb walking across the pavement, but I kept moving, away from their champagne-soaked future. And then, I saw him. My grandfather stood just past the parking lot lights, like some fragment from a life I'd forgotten how to trust. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. He simply nodded, then turned, and I followed. Back at my apartment, silence pressed against me harder than any accusation Garrett had thrown. I sat on the edge of my couch, staring at nothing, the echoes of their words chasing each other in my mind. Family helps its own. She's not herself. Pity. Pity. Maybe they're right, I thought, rubbing my hands against my knees. Maybe I am the leech. After all, what did I have left? The knock startled me, not soft, not hesitant, a sharp, deliberate knock. I didn't move. For a long moment, I sat frozen, listening. Another knock, louder. My body shook, not from fear, but exhaustion so deep I wasn't sure I could stand. But I did. I crossed the small apartment. I opened the door, and there he was, Arthur Whitmore, my grandfather, alive. I didn't cry, couldn't. My mind shut down. My heart refused to believe. You kept your promise, he said softly. His voice cracked, but those words were steady. You stayed true. I gripped the doorframe until my knuckles hurt. He looked gaunt, hollow in places I didn't remember, but he was real, and standing in front of me, I didn't hug him, I didn't move. Instead, I whispered, "Where the hell have you been?" He nodded, like he'd been waiting for that. "Come with me." And I did. We drove out of Austin, his old truck rattling along roads I didn't know. He didn't speak. Neither did I. Every few minutes I looked over, afraid he'd vanish, but he kept driving. Finally, he pulled off the road onto a gravel path, leading us to a small cabin tucked deep into woods outside the city. No neighbors, no lights. Just this forgotten place. Inside, maps covered the walls. Red strings, old photographs, stacks of folders and flash drives. My eyes scanned everything, unable to understand. What is this? My voice cracked. He turned to me, and for the first time that night, the man I remembered as my grandfather, the one who taught me chess, who brewed coffee every morning before sunrise, stood in front of me. This, he said quietly, is 5 years of my life. And then he told me, Colorado, that hunting trip. Garrett had been the one to suggest it. Marcus arranged the cabin. Arthur trusted them. He shouldn't have. They waited until the third day. He remembered the push. He remembered falling. He shouldn't have survived. But a local shepherd found him at the bottom of the ravine. Broken ribs, a fractured skull. Arthur didn't even know his own name for 2 weeks. When he remembered, he stayed gone. Why? My voice cracked. To protect you. And Clara. Marcus would have come after anyone I loved. And me sitting in silence while they called me a leech, that was protecting me. Yet my anger wasn't loud. It was quiet, sharper because of it. Arthur closed his eyes. I knew Marcus. If I tried to reach you, he'd destroy you too. You left me to rot. His silence said enough. I'm done rotting, I whispered. He opened a battered metal case and pulled out files, voice recordings, notarized statements. Everything I need to destroy him. Everything. But the trigger. I shook my head. What are you saying? They're planning to finalize the IPO. Once Garrett is declared CEO, they win. Legally. Financially. And? Arthur looked at me, then really looked. I rewrote my will. You're the sole heir now, Venna. My breath stopped. You're the only person who never tried to take anything. I stumbled back, shaking my head. No, I can't. You can. I stared at the walls. Maps, dates, betrayal mapped out in color. I can't. Arthur reached into his pocket and laid something on the table beside the files. The handkerchief. The one I'd stitched for him as a child, his initials still embroidered, though faded now. He carried it all these years. I sank to the floor, legs giving out. I didn't cry. I broke. Minutes passed. Or hours. I don't know. Arthur waited. When I spoke again, my voice was steady. What do you want from me? He hesitated. They need to be exposed, publicly, at the shareholders' meeting. That's the only way. I looked up. This isn't about saving the company anymore, is it? He said nothing, and I understood. This wasn't survival. It was justice. I stood up, slowly. My knees still shook, but my voice didn't. Tell me where to start. Arthur's answer wasn't complicated. It wasn't a plan sketched on blueprints or whispered like some Hollywood thriller. It was simple. We go tonight. And that's how I found myself standing at the foot of the Marlowe Global Tower under harsh spotlights, cameras flashing like lightning all around me. The glass building loomed over me like it always had, as if reminding me where I stood. But this time, I wasn't just their forgotten daughter. I wasn't a silent guest at their success. I was the reckoning they never expected. I wasn't alone. Clara stood next to me, my mother. Her hand trembled as she touched my sleeve once, silently asking if we were really doing this. I nodded. Arthur wasn't at my side. Not yet. He was waiting somewhere inside, as planned. The doors opened. Stepping inside that building again was like swallowing broken glass. Every surface was polished, gleaming, indifferent. People turned and stared as I walked past. Some recognized me. Some just saw a name tag that didn't match their memories. No one spoke, except Garrett. I saw him first. His smirk was all I needed to know he'd noticed my arrival. He said something to a staff member, gestured lazily in my direction, and I was guided, no, herded, to a table at the very back of the hall. Clara sat beside me without a word. Her gaze was locked straight ahead. The event felt like a coronation, a celebration of power disguised as a family reunion. Executives filled the room, investors in sleek suits, reporters hovering along the walls like shadows waiting to catch blood in the air. Then Marcus stepped on stage. I couldn't breathe. He stood beneath the Marlowe Global logo, smiling like a man who thought himself untouchable. His voice echoed through the hall as he talked about innovation, expansion, legacy. Only he never mentioned Arthur's name. Not once. Beside him, Garrett grinned like a prince waiting for his crown. I sat in silence, my hands flat on the linen tablecloth, my heart steady despite everything screaming inside me. Marcus raised his glass, toasting the future, praising Garrett as the leader who would guide Marlowe Global to its next chapter. And Garrett, looking straight at me as if I were dust beneath his shoes, added casually, "Some in this family chose to disappear. Others rose to lead." Laughter, polite, hollow. I didn't move, not yet. Arthur's signal came with the lights dimming slightly, almost imperceptibly, but I felt it. The air changed. A door opened near the stage, and then Arthur walked in. Alive, whole, real. The room didn't react instantly. It took a moment, like people didn't trust their own eyes. Then I heard it. Gasps, glasses clinking as someone dropped theirs. Garrett's. Marcus? He didn't move. Arthur stepped forward, took the microphone from Marcus's frozen hands, and spoke. "I'm not dead." Silence. "But your honor is." Behind him, the screens lit up. Emails, voice recordings. I heard Marcus's voice across the hall, flat, emotionless, discussing making it look like an accident. Garrett's laughter in the background, photos of Arthur's broken body after the fall. Medical reports. Financial records showing millions rerouted to hidden accounts. I stood still. The room didn't. Reporters swarmed closer. Investors shouted questions. Security didn't know where to look. Marcus tried to speak. I watched him scramble for words, accusing Arthur of confusion, of fragile health. Garrett turned toward the side exit, but uniformed officers blocked his path. And then it was my turn. I stepped forward, not onto the stage, but just enough for my voice to carry. "Dad," I said, steady, not angry. Calm, after all these years. "You always said I was a leech. Let's see how long you survive, without me carrying your lies." My words landed like a stone in a glass house. Marcus looked at me, and for the first time, I saw it. Fear. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists moments later. Arthur didn't look at me. He didn't have to. Clara moved beside me. She cried silently, but there was strength in her tears now. And just like that, the man who once controlled my world was led away in chains. After everything, the silence felt strange. Like walking through a house where someone should be yelling, but no one is. A silence so heavy, it presses down on your chest. Weeks passed after that night at Marlowe Global. The cameras left. The headlines faded. And yet, every morning when I unlocked the doors of Whitmore Dynamics, the weight of what happened still lingered. Yes, the name had been restored. The logo Arthur designed, the one Marcus erased, was back over the entrance, but what was lost wasn't as easy to rebuild. I sat in Arthur's old office the first day, alone. Papers piled neatly. My name, Venna Whitmore, printed clearly on the documents. I signed them one after another, officially reclaiming what was taken from us. It didn't feel like victory, not even close. More like standing in the ruins of a house fire, holding the deed. Across town, Clara found her own peace. She refused to return to the city. Instead, she lived quietly in Arthur's cabin up in the Colorado hills. I visited her last Sunday, found her tending to a tiny herb garden behind the cabin. Her hair had turned almost completely gray, but her hands were steady again. She looked up when she saw me, and for the first time in years, her voice didn't shake. "I was drowning, Venna," she said softly, "and you pulled me up." I remember standing there, holding a basket of cut herbs, realizing something strange. I had spent years waiting for my mother to rescue me. I never thought maybe it had been the other way around. Arthur didn't want to return to the corporate world. He stayed in the cabin too, quietly rebuilding the man Marcus and Garrett tried to erase. He said the office belonged to me now. "I didn't survive to reclaim, Venna," he told me once, staring at the mountain peaks. "I survived to release." He didn't want power back. He wanted peace. And he gave me one final warning. Don't carry their shadows forever. I thought about that when I stood outside the county courthouse, watching Marcus being sentenced to 20 years, Garrett to 15. I never visited them, never wrote. Some chains aren't made of iron. Some are the silence of those you no longer care about. Back at Whitmore Dynamics, I did what felt right. I turned the company's focus toward rebuilding, not just profits, but integrity. We cut ties with the environmental contracts Marcus signed, started local outreach programs. But the part that mattered most? I established the Marion Foundation, named after my grandmother, the woman who taught me compassion before Marcus taught me betrayal. It funds shelters for disowned daughters, women who, like me, were told they didn't belong in their own families, women who learned silence, like I once did. I don't speak much about my family's downfall publicly, but every time I sign a new partnership for the foundation, I remember why I'm doing it. In Arthur's old office, now mine, there's a single item on the desk that matters. The engraved bracelet I once thought proved I was nothing. The one Garrett used to mock me, calling me the Leech. It sits there quietly, not as a symbol of loss, but of choice, of what I chose to carry forward and what I finally left behind. People say time heals. They're wrong. Time only lets you decide what scars you'll carry and what ones you'll turn into armor. I've learned that. Now, if you're watching this, maybe you've been called names too. Maybe you've been told you're not enough, that you don't belong. Let me ask you something. What would you have done if your own father called you nothing and you proved him wrong? I wasn't the Leech my father claimed. I was the legacy he never deserved.